Ma'am, you need to remove that uniform immediately. The TSA supervisor's voice cut through the security checkpoint at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport with the kind of authority reserved for catching criminals. Colonel Christine Hayes stood perfectly still, her Air Force dress blues impeccable, the silver eagles on her shoulders gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights, a leather briefcase containing classified mission documents in her left hand. "I'm sorry?" Christine replied, her tone measured despite the absurdity of what she'd just heard. "That's military property," the supervisor continued, a heavy-set white man whose name tag read, Gary Mitchell, Senior TSA Supervisor. He gestured at her uniform with visible disdain. "Unauthorized possession of military uniforms is a federal offense. Where did you get it?" Around them, the security checkpoint had gone quiet. Passengers in the screening lines craned their necks to watch. 2 additional TSA officers flanked Gary, their body language aggressive, hands hovering near their radios as if Christine posed a physical threat. "I'm wearing it because I'm an active-duty Air Force colonel," Christine said clearly, reaching slowly for her military ID to avoid any sudden movements that might escalate the situation. "My identification is in my—" "Don't move," Gary snapped, stepping forward. "Rodriguez, Santos, detain her. My name is Colonel Christine Hayes. I'm 38 years old, and I've served in the United States Air Force for 16 years. I'm a decorated combat veteran with 2 tours in Afghanistan, a Bronze Star for Valor, and security clearance so high that most people don't even know the classification level exists. 48 hours ago, I was briefing the Joint Chiefs at the Pentagon about a sensitive operation I commanded. This morning, I'm being treated like a criminal at an airport security checkpoint because 3 TSA officers have decided that a black woman couldn't possibly be a real colonel." The irony wasn't lost on Christine. She'd faced enemy fire in Kandahar with more composure than this required, but combat had clear rules of engagement. This situation had none. "Sir, if you'll just verify my credentials," she tried again, but Gary was already signaling his officers. "We've had multiple incidents of people impersonating military personnel," he announced loudly, clearly performing for the growing crowd of onlookers. "Stolen valor is a serious crime, and we take it very seriously here." Rodriguez, a younger officer who looked deeply uncomfortable, approached with handcuffs. "Ma'am, please turn around and place your hands behind your back." "This is a mistake," Christine said, her voice still controlled but an edge of steel creeping in. "I am Colonel Christine Hayes, service number—" "Save it for the federal agents," Gary interrupted. "We've seen fake IDs before. Yours might be good but not good enough." What Gary Mitchell didn't know, what he had no way of knowing because he'd made his judgment in the first 3 seconds of seeing her, was that the fake ID he'd dismissed without examining was issued directly by the Department of Defense, that the uniform he claimed was stolen had been tailored specifically for her at Andrews Air Force Base, that the insignia he assumed was costume jewelry represented rank earned through years of exemplary service, multiple combat deployments, and command of critical operations. He also didn't know that the briefcase she carried contained documents so sensitive that unauthorized access would trigger immediate involvement from military intelligence, the FBI, and possibly the Secret Service. But he was about to learn all of that, the hard way. As Rodriguez moved to handcuff her, Christine made a decision. She could resist, could pull rank loudly and dramatically. But years of military discipline had taught her that sometimes the most powerful response was disciplined compliance, followed by systematic consequences. "I'm going to cooperate," she said clearly, looking directly at Rodriguez. "But I'm also going to state for the record that this detention is unlawful, that you failed to verify my credentials through proper channels, and that there will be significant repercussions for this action." "Threatening federal officers now?" Gary said with a smirk. "That's another charge." The handcuffs clicked shut around Christine's wrists. The metal was cold, uncomfortably tight. Around them, passengers pulled out phones, recording the scene. A middle-aged black woman in business attire spoke up from the security line. "That's a real uniform. the woman called out. "My husband served 20 years. Those insignia are legitimate." "Ma'am, step back," Gary ordered without even glancing at her. A white man in his 60s wearing a Veterans Association cap moved closer. "Son, I was Army infantry. That woman is a full bird colonel. You're making a serious mistake." "Sir, unless you want to be detained as well, I suggest you move along," Gary replied, his confidence unshaken. Christine remained silent now, her mind already working through protocols. In approximately 6 minutes, several things would happen in rapid succession. Her failure to check in with the Pentagon's secure line, mandatory within 30 minutes of landing, would trigger automatic alerts. The classified briefcase, equipped with location tracking and biometric sensors, would register that she'd been separated from it by more than 3 feet for longer than authorized. And most significantly, the Military Liaison Office at DFW would receive notification that an active duty officer had been detained. But more immediately, her phone, still in her carry-on bag that TSA had confiscated, contained direct contact numbers for the Pentagon, Langley Air Force Base, and her commanding officer, Lieutenant General Robert Chen, who'd specifically instructed her to call the moment she landed. Gary Mitchell had just detained a senior military officer returning from a classified briefing, confiscated documents with national security implications, and done so based purely on the assumption that she couldn't possibly be who she claimed to be. The military didn't respond well to that kind of assumption. "Take her to the security office," Gary instructed his officers. "And that briefcase. Bag it as evidence." "That briefcase contains classified materials," Christine said firmly. "Unauthorized access is a felony under the Espionage Act." Gary laughed. "Right. And I'm sure you'll tell us it has nuclear codes or something." "It contains operational documents classified at TSSCI level," Christine replied, using the exact terminology. "Top secret, sensitive, compartmented information. If you open that case without proper clearance, you'll be facing federal prosecution." For the first time, Gary's confidence flickered slightly. TSSCI wasn't terminology civilians typically threw around casually. But he'd committed now, in front of dozens of witnesses, with phones recording every moment. "We'll let the federal agents determine what's in the case," he decided, though his voice carried less certainty. As they led Christine away from the checkpoint, the veteran with the cap called after them. "I'm getting your supervisor's name, son. This is wrong." Christine caught his eye and gave him a small nod of acknowledgement. Witnesses mattered. Documentation mattered. And in approximately 5 minutes, when the military's automated systems registered her detention and the separation from classified materials, none of these TSA officers would matter at all. What they would matter for, however, was the comprehensive investigation, the systematic dismantling of careers, and the case study that would be taught in law enforcement training about the catastrophic consequences of substituting bias for procedure. Gary Mitchell thought he'd caught someone committing stolen valor. Instead, he'd just triggered a national security incident that would reach the highest levels of military and federal law enforcement within minutes. And Colonel Christine Hayes, walking calmly between 2 TSA officers with handcuffs cutting into her wrists, was already counting down the time until the hammer fell. If stories about justice and accountability resonate with you, make sure you subscribe, because what happens when you wrongly detain a military colonel will restore your faith that some institutions still protect their own. The TSA security office was a cramped windowless room that smelled of stale coffee and industrial cleaning solution. Gary Mitchell shoved Christine into a metal folding chair with unnecessary force, while Rodriguez and Santos positioned themselves by the door, their discomfort now visibly intensified. "Empty your pockets," Gary ordered, settling behind a desk cluttered with incident reports and a half-eaten sandwich. "Everything on the table." Christine complied silently, placing her items with precise military efficiency despite the handcuffs. Her wallet containing her military ID and driver's license, a small notepad with operational notes, her Pentagon building access card, a challenge coin from the Secretary of Defense, given personally 3 months ago after a successful mission in the South China Sea. Gary barely glanced at any of it. his mind already made up. "These can all be faked," he announced, picking up the military ID and examining it with theatrical skepticism. "You can buy this stuff online. The uniform, the badges, the fake credentials. People do it all the time for attention or to get military discounts." "That ID has a holographic seal and a chip that can be verified through DoD databases," Christine replied evenly. "If you'll simply—" "I'll decide what needs verifying," Gary cut her off. He leaned back in his chair with the casual arrogance of someone who believed his authority was absolute within these walls. "You know what I think? I think you're one of these activists trying to make some kind of statement. Dress up in military drag, wait for someone to question you, then cry discrimination." The accusation hung in the air, so absurd that Christine almost laughed. Almost. "I've been serving this country since before you started working for TSA," she said quietly. "I've earned every stripe, every insignia, every qualification on this uniform through 16 years of dedicated service." "Sure you have," Gary replied mockingly. "And I bet you've got some compelling story about overcoming adversity and breaking barriers. They always do." Rodriguez shifted uncomfortably by the door. "Sir, maybe we should just run her ID through the system like she's asking. It would only take a minute to—" "Rodriguez, when I want your opinion, I'll ask for it," Gary snapped. He turned back to Christine. "Where are you coming from? What's your travel history today?" Christine calculated her response carefully. The mission she'd been briefed on was classified. The meetings at the Pentagon were classified. Even her presence at certain locations was operationally sensitive. "I'm returning from official Air Force business in the D.C. area," she said, providing the maximum information she could without breaching security protocols. "I'm not authorized to discuss specifics without proper clearance verification." Gary's eyes lit up at that. "Not authorized. Right. That's convenient. Can't prove where you've been because it's all classified and secret." He made exaggerated air quotes around the last words. At that exact moment, 3 things happened simultaneously. In the Pentagon's Operations Center, a junior officer monitoring the personnel accountability system noticed an alert. Colonel Christine Hayes, who'd checked out of a classified briefing at 0600 hours that morning with mandatory check-in requirements, had failed to respond to automated status requests. Her phone was offline. Her location tracking had gone dark. Protocol required immediate investigation. At Langley Air Force Base in Virginia, Lieutenant General Robert Chen finished a briefing and checked his secure phone. No message from Colonel Hayes, who should have landed 30 minutes ago and called immediately. He tried her number. It went to voicemail. He tried again. Same result. Chen had commanded Christine for 4 years. She'd never, not once, missed a mandatory check-in. Ever. He picked up his secure line and called the Pentagon's duty officer. And in the TSA checkpoint area, James Whitmore, the same British businessman who'd filmed the arrest of Captain Nora Mitchell 6 months earlier, and whose video had gone viral, stood watching Gary Mitchell escort a black woman in Air Force dress blues toward the security office in handcuffs. He pulled out his phone and started recording. Again. Back in the security office, Gary was now examining the classified briefcase with undisguised suspicion. "This thing is locked tight," he observed, running his fingers over the biometric scanner and numerical keypad. "What's really in here? Drugs? Cash? Using a fake military case to smuggle contraband through security. That's creative, I'll give you that." "That case is property of the United States Air Force," Christine said, her voice hardening. "It's equipped with tamper detection. If you attempt to open it without proper authorization, you'll trigger multiple federal alarms." "Federal alarms," Gary repeated mockingly. "You've really committed to this character, haven't you?" Santos, the other TSA officer, spoke up hesitantly. "Sir, that case does have some serious-looking hardware on it. Maybe we should call—" "We're not calling anyone until I finish processing this situation," Gary interrupted. He turned to Christine. "You know what the penalty is for stolen valor? federal charges, prison time, and when you're wearing colonel's insignia, that makes it worse. Christine met his gaze steadily. And do you know the penalty for unlawfully detaining a senior military officer? For interfering with classified operations? For violating the Uniform Code of Military Justice through civilian interference with military personnel? Uniform Code of Military Justice? Gary laughed. That doesn't apply to civilians. It does when you detain military personnel and confiscate classified materials, Christine corrected. And there are about 6 different federal statutes you're currently violating, each carrying significant penalties. Gary's confidence wavered for just a moment before reasserting itself. Nice try, but I've been doing this job for 12 years. I know the law. What Gary Mitchell didn't know was that in those 12 years, he'd never encountered someone like Colonel Christine Hayes. He'd questioned travelers, detained suspicious individuals, even caught a few people with fake credentials. But he'd never detained a senior military officer with active security clearance who'd been handling classified materials 48 hours earlier. He'd also never detained someone whose absence would automatically trigger military emergency protocols. At the Pentagon, the duty officer was now on the phone with Lieutenant General Chen. Sir, we've got a flag on Colonel Hayes. She's not responding to check-in requirements, and her secure phone shows last activity at DFW Airport 33 minutes ago, then went offline. DFW? Chen's voice sharpened. She should have landed there at 14:20 hours. Call the airport's military liaison office, now, and get me DFW Airport Security Director on the line. Yes, sir. And Lieutenant? If Colonel Hayes is in some kind of trouble, I want to know about it in the next 5 minutes, or someone's career is ending today. The mechanisms of military bureaucracy, normally slow and methodical, moved with terrifying speed when a senior officer with active security clearance went dark. James Whitmore, meanwhile, had positioned himself near the security office. His phone was recording steadily. He'd learned from the Skybridge incident that documentation mattered, that witnesses mattered, that holding authorities accountable required evidence that couldn't be dismissed or explained away. He tweeted from his account, which now had 78,000 followers after the viral pilot video. Watching Audi TSA detain what appears to be an actual Air Force colonel at DFW. Same pattern as before. This needs to stop. Military while black. Within 2 minutes, the tweet had 156 shares. Inside the security office, Christine's phone, still in her confiscated carry-on, buzzed repeatedly with incoming calls. Gary glanced at it, saw LTG Chen secure on the screen, and silenced it without answering. Popular, aren't you? He commented. Friends trying to coordinate your story? That's my commanding officer, Christine said calmly. A 3-star general, and every call you ignore is making your situation exponentially worse. Right, Gary scoffed. A 3-star general, of course. Rodriguez and Santos exchanged glances. Something wasn't adding up. The woman was too calm, too precise in her responses. Her posture, even handcuffed in a chair, projected authority. The terminology she used wasn't something civilians typically knew. And that briefcase did look genuinely military grade, not something bought online. Sir, Rodriguez ventured again. Maybe we should at least verify. Rodriguez, if you question my judgment one more time, I'm writing you up. Gary snapped. This woman is running a con, and I'm not falling for it. The veteran from the checkpoint, who'd followed them to the security office, knocked on the door. Santos opened it slightly. I need to speak with whoever's in charge, the veteran said firmly. That woman you arrested is a legitimate colonel. I can tell from the uniform details, the bearing, everything about her. Sir, this is a security matter, Santos replied. We appreciate your concern, but my concern is you're about to start an international incident, the veteran insisted. I served under colonels. I know what real rank looks like. That woman is the genuine article. Gary appeared at the door. "Sir, we have the situation under control. Please return to your gate." "I'm not going anywhere until you verify her credentials properly," the veteran said. "And I've got about 20 other veterans from the terminal willing to vouch for her." "Are you threatening me?" Gary's face flushed red. "I'm promising you that if you don't fix this mistake right now, you're going to regret it for the rest of your career." Gary slammed the door in his face. Christine watched this exchange with the detached observation of someone mentally cataloging evidence. The veteran's testimony, Rodriguez and Santos's visible discomfort, Gary's repeated refusals to verify credentials through proper channels, the ignored phone calls from her commanding officer. It was all building into something Gary Mitchell couldn't imagine yet. Her phone buzzed again. This time the screen showed Pentagon OPS CTR, urgent. Gary silenced it. In that moment, approximately 6 minutes after her initial detention, the automated systems registered critical failures. Christine's biometric separation from the classified briefcase exceeded authorized limits. Her mandatory check-in window closed. Her secure phone remained offline. Alarms began sounding in places Gary Mitchell had never heard of and would never see. And Lieutenant General Robert Chen, who'd commanded combat operations in 3 theaters and had a reputation for protecting his people with lethal efficiency, learned that one of his best colonels had been detained by civilian security at a domestic airport. His response was immediate and comprehensive. "Get me the TSA administrator, the airport director, and DFW police chief," he ordered, "and someone find out exactly who detained Colonel Hayes and why they're still breathing free air." The DFW Airport Military Liaison Office occupied a small suite in Terminal D, staffed by rotating personnel from all service branches. Master Sergeant David Torres, Army, was reviewing paperwork when his secure line rang with the distinctive tone that meant Pentagon Operations Center. "Torres, DFW Military Liaison." "Sergeant, this is Major Paulson, Pentagon Ops. We have a critical situation. Colonel Christine Hayes, Air Force, traveling through your airport has gone dark. Last known location was your main security checkpoint 40 minutes ago. We need immediate verification of her status." Torres was already pulling up airport security camera access on his computer. "Pulling feeds now, sir. Stand by." He scrolled through timestamps, found the checkpoint Christine had entered, watched her approach the screening area in dress blues, watched Gary Mitchell confront her, watched the handcuffs go on. "Sir, we have a problem," Torres said, his voice tight. "Colonel Hayes has been detained by TSA. I'm watching the security footage now. She's currently in custody." There was a brief, dangerous silence on the other end. "Detained? For what?" "Unknown, sir, but it appears to be unlawful detention. She presented credentials, which were ignored. Currently handcuffed in the TSA security office." "Sergeant Torres, you are authorized to use any means necessary to secure Colonel Hayes' immediate release. I'm notifying the chain of command. Expect calls from very angry people in the next 3 minutes." "Understood, sir." Torres grabbed his jacket, his sidearm, and his badge. As he headed for the door, his phone rang again. This time it was DFW Airport Security Director, Richard Carmichael, whose voice carried barely controlled fury. "Torres, did Pentagon just call you about a detained Air Force colonel?" "Yes, sir. I'm en route to TSA security now." "I'll meet you there. And Torres? I just got off the phone with a 3-star general who used language I haven't heard since my Marine Corps days. Someone's about to have a very bad day." In the security office, Christine had shifted tactics. She'd stopped trying to convince Gary Mitchell of anything. Instead, she was watching the clock on the wall, calculating time elapsed, protocols triggered, and systems now cascading into motion. 43 minutes since detention. Her mandatory check-in window had closed 38 minutes ago. The briefcase separation alarm had activated 35 minutes ago. By now, the Pentagon's Operations Center would have notified her commanding officer. Lieutenant General Chen would have initiated emergency protocols. The Military Liaison Office would be mobilizing. The machine was in motion. Gary Mitchell just couldn't hear it yet. "You're awfully quiet now," Gary observed, misinterpreting her silence as resignation. "Starting to realize the trouble you're in." "I'm realizing the trouble you're in," Christine corrected quietly. "But you won't believe that until it's too late." Gary's phone rang. He glanced at the screen, DFW Security Director, and sent it to voicemail. "Important call?" Christine asked, her tone neutral. "Nothing that can't wait until I finish processing you." Rodriguez, who'd been standing by the door with increasing agitation, finally spoke up with conviction. "Sir, that was the airport security director. You can't just ignore that call." "I can, and I did," Gary replied. "He'll understand once I explain we caught someone running a military impersonation scheme." His phone rang again. Same caller. Gary declined it again. Christine almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But sympathy was difficult when you were sitting in handcuffs because someone had decided your appearance invalidated your credentials. She thought about every time she'd faced similar assumptions. The recruiting officer who'd suggested she consider support roles instead of officer training. The flight instructor at pilot school who'd been visibly skeptical until she'd executed a flawless emergency landing simulation on her first attempt. The colonel at her first assignment who'd asked if she was there to take notes before realizing she was the briefing officer, and every time she'd responded the same way, with excellence, with dignity, and with the quiet confidence that her work would speak louder than anyone's prejudice. But this situation was different. This wasn't subtle bias or unconscious assumptions. This was active discrimination backed by legal authority, and it required a different kind of response. Outside the security office, Master Sergeant Torres arrived simultaneously with Director Carmichael. The veteran who'd been advocating for Christine spotted them immediately. "Are you here about the colonel?" he asked urgently. "We are," Carmichael confirmed. "You witnessed the detention." From start to finish, Gary Mitchell detained her without cause, refused to verify her credentials, and has been holding her for— He checked his watch. 46 minutes now. Torres's jaw tightened. 46 minutes. Every minute of unlawful detention of a senior officer was another violation, another incident report, another career-ending mistake. Carmichael pulled out his phone, dialing a number with deliberate precision. When someone answered, his voice was professionally calm but edged with steel. "This is Director Carmichael, DFW Airport Security. I need TSA Regional Director Martin on the line immediately. We have a critical incident involving the unlawful detention of a senior military officer." Inside the office, Gary's radio crackled. "Mitchell, this is Control. Director Carmichael is requesting immediate access to your location. Acknowledge." Gary keyed his radio with visible irritation. "Control. I'm in the middle of processing a detainee. Tell the director I'll brief him when I'm finished." There was a pause. Then, "Mitchell, the director says you'll open that door in the next 30 seconds or he's opening it himself with airport police. Your choice." Gary's face flushed red. "This is ridiculous. I'm following protocol." "Sir," Santos interrupted, his voice urgent, "I really think we should comply. The director doesn't make requests like that unless it's serious." For the first time, genuine doubt flickered across Gary's face. But he'd invested too much now, committed too publicly. Backing down would mean admitting he'd been wrong from the beginning. "Fine," he snapped. "But when this woman turns out to be exactly what I said she is, I'm filing complaints against everyone who undermined my authority." He stood and opened the door. Director Carmichael entered first, his expression thunderous. Master Sergeant Torres followed, and when his eyes landed on Christine, handcuffed in full dress blues, maintaining perfect military bearing despite her treatment, his face went stony with controlled rage. "Colonel Hayes," Torres said, coming to attention. "I'm Master Sergeant Torres, DFW Military Liaison Office. On behalf of the United States Armed Forces, I apologize for this treatment." The effect of his words was immediate and devastating. Gary's confidence cracked visibly. Rodriguez and Santos straightened unconsciously. military respect overriding civilian authority. And Christine, for the first time in 47 minutes, allowed a small smile to touch her face. "Sergeant Torres," she acknowledged. "I appreciate the response time." Carmichael turned to Gary, his voice dangerously quiet. "Officer Mitchell, you are currently detaining an active-duty Air Force colonel without cause. You will remove those handcuffs immediately." "She's impersonating," Gary started, but Carmichael cut him off with a raised hand. "She's not impersonating anyone. We've verified her identity through military databases, confirmed her status with the Pentagon, and spoken directly with her commanding officer, Lieutenant General Chen, who is currently demanding explanations from people several levels above my pay grade." He stepped closer. "So I'm going to ask you one time. What made you think it was appropriate to detain a senior military officer?" Gary's mouth opened and closed. The truth, that he'd looked at her and simply decided she couldn't be what she claimed, was impossible to articulate now. She didn't have proper identification," he finally managed. Torres held up his phone, displaying Christine's official military record. "Colonel Christine Hayes, 16 years of service, Bronze Star with Valor Device, Combat Action Badge, current assignment, Strategic Operations Command, security clearance, top secret sensitive compartmented information." He looked at Gary with undisguised contempt. "She had proper identification. You chose not to verify it." "I want those handcuffs off her now," Carmichael ordered. "And I want her personal effects and that briefcase returned immediately." As Rodriguez moved to unlock the handcuffs, his hands were shaking. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I tried to—" "I know," Christine said quietly. "Your objections are noted." The moment the cuffs came off, Christine stood, rolling her shoulders to restore circulation. She accepted her phone from Santos and saw the cascade of missed calls. Pentagon Operations Center, Lieutenant General Chen, Base Command, Military Liaison. Each ignored call a documented violation. She called Chen first. "Colonel Hayes," his voice came through tight with controlled fury. "Sit rep. Sir, I was unlawfully detained by TSA for 48 minutes. Detained, handcuffed, and separated from classified materials. Currently being released. No injuries. Full incident report will be filed within the hour." "Detained for what reason?" Christine glanced at Gary Mitchell, who'd gone pale. "The supervising officer decided my uniform was stolen, sir. He believed I was impersonating a colonel." The silence on the other end was absolute. Then, "Put me on speaker." Christine complied, holding her phone so everyone in the room could hear. "This is Lieutenant General Robert Chen, United States Air Force." His voice filled the small office with undeniable authority. "I want the name of every person involved in detaining Colonel Hayes. Now." Carmichael took over. "Sir, this is Richard Carmichael, Airport Security Director. The primary officer is Gary Mitchell, TSA Supervisor. 2 additional officers, Rodriguez and Santos, were present. I'm handling the immediate response and will ensure full cooperation with any investigation." "Mr. Mitchell," Chen continued, "you detained one of my best officers based on what exactly?" Gary couldn't answer. Any honest response would reveal the bias that had motivated his actions. "That's what I thought," Chen said coldly. "Expect calls from military CID, the DoD Inspector General, and federal prosecutors. And Mr. Mitchell? I'm going to personally ensure that what happened today follows you for the rest of your career." The line disconnected. In the devastating silence that followed, Christine collected her briefcase, verified the seals were intact, and gathered her belongings with methodical precision. The hammer was about to fall, and everyone in that room knew it. The next 30 minutes unfolded with the precision of a military operation, because it essentially was one. Military Criminal Investigation Command arrived first. two special agents in dark suits who introduced themselves with credentials that made Gary Mitchell's TSA badge look like a toy. They immediately secured the security office as a crime scene, photographing everything, documenting the handcuff marks on Christine's wrists, cataloging every ignored phone call. "Colonel Hayes," the lead agent said, "I'm Special Agent Morrison, CID. We'll need a full statement, but first, are you injured? Do you require medical attention?" "I'm fine, Agent Morrison, but I want every detail of this incident documented, every call ignored, every refusal to verify credentials, every moment I was unlawfully detained." "Already being compiled, ma'am. We pulled security footage, radio communications, and phone records. It's comprehensive." Behind them, Gary Mitchell sat in the same chair he'd forced Christine to occupy, the role reversal so complete it would have been poetic if it weren't so pathetic. His badge and radio had been confiscated. His career was over. He just didn't fully comprehend it yet. Director Carmichael's phone rang. He answered, listened for 30 seconds, then looked at Gary with something approaching pity. "That was the TSA administrator," Carmichael said quietly. "You're terminated, effective immediately. Security will escort you from the building. You're not to have any contact with airport systems or personnel pending the federal investigation." "You can't fire me," Gary protested weakly. "I have union protection. I was following—" "You detained a senior military officer, confiscated classified materials, and ignored direct orders from your supervisors," Carmichael interrupted. "The union already declined to represent you. They called it indefensible conduct. You're done." Rodriguez and Santos, who'd been standing against the wall like condemned men awaiting sentencing, waited for their fate. Christine caught Torres's attention and gestured toward them. "Sergeant," these two officers expressed concerns about the detention multiple times. Rodriguez specifically suggested verification through proper channels. Santos questioned the handling of the classified briefcase. Neither had the authority to override their supervisor, but they attempted to do the right thing. Torres nodded, making notes. Their objections, documented on radio communications and witnessed by Christine herself, would likely save their careers. Probably. James Whitmore's video had now been viewed 320,000 times. The tweet thread had exploded with responses from veterans, active duty military, civil rights organizations, and news outlets. CNN had picked it up. So had Military Times, Stars and Stripes, and the Air Force Association. The narrative was devastating. Air Force colonel detained for stolen uniform while returning from Pentagon briefing. By the time the story finished spreading, it would be studied in law enforcement academies, military training courses, and civil rights seminars as a textbook example of how bias could trigger catastrophic consequences. Christine's phone rang again. This time, it was a number she recognized immediately, the Pentagon's Public Affairs Office. "Colonel Hayes, this is Colonel Bradley, Public Affairs. We're coordinating media response to your detention. The story has gone national. We need your authorization to release your service record and mission details within classification limits to counter any attempts to justify what happened." "Authorized," Christine confirmed. "And Colonel Bradley? Make sure they emphasize that I presented valid credentials that were ignored, that 3 phone calls from the Pentagon were declined, that this wasn't a misunderstanding, it was a choice." "Understood, ma'am. The Air Force isn't letting this slide quietly." Another call came through immediately after, this one from the Department of Defense Inspector General's office, then the Federal Aviation Administration, then Base Command at Langley. Each call was another nail in the coffin of everyone who'd been involved in her detention. The veteran from the checkpoint, whose name Christine learned was Marcus Williams, had organized 15 other veterans in the terminal. They'd all provided witness statements to CID, creating an unimpeachable record of what they'd observed. Their testimony was particularly damaging because it established that multiple experienced military personnel had recognized Christine's uniform and rank as legitimate, while TSA had dismissed it as fake. "Colonel," Marcus said, approaching her as she finished another call, "I served 22 years Army. I've seen a lot of things that shouldn't happen, but this? He shook his head. This was different. This was personal bias dressed up as security protocol. Thank you for not letting them get away with it. Thank you for speaking up, Christine replied. Witnesses matter. Director Carmichael pulled Christine aside, his expression grave. Colonel, on behalf of DFW Airport, I want to apologize. This should never have happened. We're implementing immediate protocol changes. Any detention of military personnel in uniform requires supervisor notification and credential verification through military liaison within 5 minutes. No exceptions. That's a start, Christine acknowledged. But the real issue isn't protocols. It's the assumption that a black woman couldn't possibly be a colonel. That's not fixed with policy memos. You're right, Carmichael admitted. Which is why we're also implementing mandatory bias recognition training for all security personnel developed and delivered by military diversity officers. If someone can't recognize legitimate military rank across all demographics, they shouldn't be in security. Christine nodded. It wasn't perfect, but it was movement in the right direction. Gary Mitchell was being escorted from the building by airport police when he finally seemed to grasp the full magnitude of what he'd done. He looked back at Christine, his face ashen. I was just doing my job, he said, the last desperate defense of someone with no defense left. No, Christine corrected, her voice carrying the authority of 16 years of command. You were doing what bias told you to do. There's a difference, and now you'll have plenty of time to learn it. As Gary disappeared down the corridor, likely toward unemployment, federal investigation, and permanent unemployability and security work, Christine felt no satisfaction. Just a grim acknowledgement that consequences, properly applied, taught lessons that nothing else could. Lieutenant General Chen called again. This time, the conversation was different. Not emergency response, but strategic planning. Christine, I want you to know that this is going to be handled at every level, he said. DoD is filing formal complaints with TSA. The Air Force is reviewing its security protocols at civilian airports. And I'm personally recommending you for an accommodation for the way you handled yourself during an unlawful detention. Sir, I don't need an accommodation for being arrested. You're not getting an accommodation for being arrested. You're getting one for maintaining operational security under duress, protecting classified materials, and documenting everything with the kind of precision that's going to make the prosecution's case airtight. He paused. And, Christine? When you file your incident report, don't hold back. Names, actions, statements, everything. This needs to be comprehensive because it's going to be read by people who can make systemic changes. Yes, sir. One more thing. Take 3 days leave. You've earned it. And I don't want you anywhere near an airport for at least 48 hours. Understood, sir. After disconnecting, Christine looked around the security office that had been her prison for 48 minutes. CID agents were still processing evidence. Carmichael was on the phone implementing emergency policy changes. Torres was coordinating with Pentagon officials. Rodriguez and Santos were giving statements that would determine their professional futures. And somewhere, Gary Mitchell was learning that the assumptions he'd made in 7 seconds had destroyed what he'd built over 12 years. The briefcase in Christine's hand represented classified operations that Gary would never know about, strategies that protected the country he'd claimed to be securing. His narrow assumptions about who could serve at senior levels had blinded him to the actual threats and actual competence right in front of him. Master Sergeant Torres approached with a tablet. Colonel, I have something you should see. The British gentleman who filmed your detention? His video has been picked up by every major news network. But more importantly, it's been shared by the Air Force Association, the National Military Family Association, and a dozen veterans organizations. The response has been significant. Christine watched a clip of CNN's coverage. The anchor's voice was grave. Tonight, questions about racial profiling in airport security after an Air Force colonel was detained for allegedly impersonating herself. Colonel Christine Hayes, a decorated combat veteran returning from Pentagon briefings, was handcuffed and held for nearly an hour after TSA officers decided her uniform must be stolen. The segment showed James Whitmore's video, clear and damning. Then it cut to an interview with Marcus Williams, the Army veteran. "I knew immediately that was a real colonel," Marcus said on camera. "Everything about her, the bearing, the uniform details, the way she carried herself. But they didn't see any of that. They saw a black woman and decided she couldn't be legitimate. If you believe accountability matters, especially when it dismantles entire systems of discrimination, subscribe to see how institutions respond when they realize their bias just detained someone who outranks almost everyone in the building." The segment concluded with a statement from the Air Force. "The unlawful detention of Colonel Hayes is unacceptable. We are working with federal authorities to ensure appropriate consequences and implementing safeguards to prevent similar incidents." Christine's phone buzzed with a text from her sister, who'd seen the news. "I'm so sorry this happened, but I'm not surprised. Call me when you can." Not surprised. That phrase carried the weight of a lifetime of similar moments, each one smaller perhaps, but collectively crushing. The assumption that she didn't belong in officer training. The suggestion that she'd been promoted because of diversity quotas, not merit. The passengers who'd questioned if she was really the pilot when she'd flown commercial missions earlier in her career. This incident was just the most dramatic, most public, most documented version of something she'd faced countless times. But this time, there would be consequences. Real, lasting, systematic consequences. And every TSA officer, every security supervisor, every person in a position to question someone's credentials would learn from what happened to Gary Mitchell when he let bias override verification. 4 months later, Colonel Christine Hayes stood at a podium in the Pentagon's Hall of Heroes, addressing an audience of 600 military and civilian leaders at the Joint Service Equal Opportunity Symposium. Behind her, a screen displayed the now infamous security footage, her detention at DFW, played without sound but devastating in its silence. "That's me," she said simply. 4 months ago, returning from classified briefings to coordinate a multinational operation. 53 minutes later, I was sitting in handcuffs because a TSA supervisor decided I didn't look like his idea of a colonel. The room was silent, except for the soft whir of cameras. Every major military publication had sent reporters. The story had never really faded. It had evolved into a national conversation about bias and security protocols and the assumptions that endangered both personnel and operations. "But I'm not here to relitigate what happened to me," Christine continued, clicking to the next slide showing new policy documents. "I'm here to discuss what happened because of me, the changes that transformed one moment of injustice into systematic reform." The first slide showed TSA's new mandatory protocols. Effective immediately, all U.S. airports must verify military credentials through official liaison offices before any uniformed service member can be detained. Maximum verification time, 5 minutes. No exceptions. Another click. The Department of Defense implemented the Military Personnel Protection Act, establishing federal penalties for civilian interference with active duty personnel engaged in official operations. What happened to me is now explicitly classified as a federal civil rights violation with mandatory prosecution. She paused, letting the weight of that sink in. Gary Mitchell, the TSA supervisor who detained me, was terminated within hours. He faced federal charges for interfering with classified operations, unlawful detention, and civil rights violations. He pled guilty to avoid trial. His sentence included 2 years probation, 500 hours community service, and permanent disqualification from security work. Christine's voice remained neutral, factual. He's currently working retail, unemployable in his chosen field, and will carry that conviction for life. In the audience, Master Sergeant Torres nodded. He'd testified at Mitchell's hearing, providing evidence that had been crucial to the prosecution. But individual accountability was just the beginning, Christine said, advancing to show training program statistics. Every TSA officer nationwide now undergoes mandatory bias recognition training developed jointly by DoD and civil rights organizations. The training uses my detention as a primary case study in how assumptions can override evidence. The screen showed testimonials from TSA officers who'd completed the training. One stood out. Watching what happened to Colonel Hayes made me realize how many times I'd made similar assumptions without even knowing it. The training saved me from making the same mistake. Christine clicked again, showing Rodriguez and Santos. The two officers who questioned their supervisor's judgment during my detention received formal commendations for attempting to follow proper protocol despite pressure to comply with unlawful orders. Both completed additional training and remain with TSA. Their example is now taught as the correct response when you witness bias in action. She moved to the next section. Airport security directors nationwide implemented the 5-minute rule. If you can't verify someone's credentials in 5 minutes using official channels, you don't have grounds for detention. Period. That simple protocol has prevented 47 similar incidents in the past 4 months alone. The number hung in the air. 47 military personnel who might have faced similar treatment, now protected by policies that emerged from Christine's experience. The British businessman who filmed my detention, James Whitmore, established a nonprofit called Documentation Matters, training citizens in proper evidence collection when they witness civil rights violations. His organization has assisted in 12 successful prosecutions nationwide. Christine paused, her expression softening slightly. My commanding officer, Lieutenant General Chen, told me something after this happened. He said, "Christine, excellence isn't enough when the system is designed to discount it. Real change requires forcing the system to confront its own failures." He was right. She clicked to a photo of herself with the Secretary of Defense. Last month, I was promoted to full colonel, ahead of schedule, and assigned as special advisor to the Secretary of Defense on military-civilian interface. My mandate is to identify and eliminate barriers that military personnel face in civilian spaces, from airports to healthcare facilities to educational institutions. The audience applauded, but Christine raised a hand for silence. I didn't accept this position because I want to be the diversity officer or the poster child for overcoming discrimination. I accepted it because I want to be the last senior officer who has to go through what I experienced. And the only way to ensure that is to change the systems, not just punish the individuals who operate within them. Director Carmichael, who'd flown in from Dallas for the symposium, sat in the third row. Under his leadership, DFW had become the model for military-friendly security protocols, with military liaison officers positioned at every major checkpoint and direct communication channels to base commands nationwide. He'd also personally apologized to Christine in a private meeting, admitting that his airport screening procedures had prioritized efficiency over accuracy, creating environments where officers like Mitchell felt empowered to act on bias rather than evidence. Here's what most people don't understand about what happened, Christine said, her voice taking on a harder edge. Gary Mitchell didn't wake up that morning planning to discriminate against a black officer. He probably didn't consider himself racist at all. But he'd internalized assumptions about authority, about who belongs in positions of power, about what legitimacy looks like. And when confronted with evidence that contradicted those assumptions, he chose his bias over the evidence. She let that sit for a moment. That's the insidious nature of systemic discrimination. It doesn't require malice. It just requires people who've never examined their own assumptions, working within systems that don't challenge those assumptions, making split-second decisions that confirm what they already believe. Christine clicked to her final slide, a photo of her in flight gear standing next to an F-16. Before I joined the Air Force's Strategic Operations Command, I was a combat pilot. 2 tours in Afghanistan, 73 combat missions. Every time I climbed into that cockpit, I knew that the aircraft didn't care about my race or gender. It responded to skill, training, and precision. The ground fire didn't discriminate. It just existed, and I had to navigate through it. She paused, the metaphor obvious but powerful. Bias is like that ground fire. It exists. It's dangerous. And the only way to survive it is to navigate with precision, document everything, and never accept that it's just how things are. Because it's not. It's how things have been. And we can change it. The applause this time was sustained, genuine. In the audience, 36 junior officers of color, lieutenants, captains, majors who'd all faced similar moments of doubt or discrimination, stood. After the symposium, Christine found Marcus Williams, the Army veteran who'd advocated for her at DFW. He'd been invited specifically because his witness testimony had been crucial to the investigation. "Colonel," he said, extending his hand. "That was powerful. Thank you for turning that nightmare into something constructive." "Thank you for speaking up when it mattered," Christine replied. "Witnesses are what transform incidents into evidence. Without you and the others, it would have been my word against his." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "I've been thinking about that day a lot. How many times have I witnessed something wrong and stayed quiet because it wasn't my business? How many people faced injustice while I convinced myself it wasn't my place to intervene?" He shook his head. "Not anymore. Your experience taught me that silence is complicity." That evening, Christine received a call from her father, retired Air Force Chief Master Sergeant David Hayes, who'd spent 30 years in uniform rising from enlisted airman to the highest enlisted rank. "Baby girl," his voice was thick with emotion. "I watched your presentation. Your mother would be so proud." Christine's mother had passed during her first deployment, but had been her inspiration for joining the Air Force in the first place. A nurse who'd served during Desert Storm, she'd always told Christine that military service was one of the few places where excellence could overcome prejudice. If you were willing to outwork and outperform everyone around you. "I hope so," Christine said. "I hope she'd think it was worth it." Worth it? Christine, you took the worst moment of your career and transformed it into policy that protects thousands of service members. You turned humiliation into accountability. That's not just worth it. That's leadership. 2 weeks later, Christine returned to DFW Airport for the first time since the incident. She'd specifically requested assignment to a flight through Dallas, a symbolic completion of the journey interrupted 4 months earlier. The security checkpoint was transformed. Large signs now displayed, "Military personnel. Present credentials to Military Liaison Office for expedited verification." A dedicated TSA officer was stationed specifically to assist military travelers. And most significantly, every officer wore a badge indicating completion of the new bias recognition training. When Christine approached in dress blues, the TSA officer's face lit up with immediate recognition, not of her personally, but of her rank and legitimacy. "Colonel, welcome to DFW," the officer said with genuine respect. "I can verify your credentials immediately, or if you prefer, the Military Liaison Office can expedite you through." "Standard processing is fine," Christine replied. "I want to see how the new protocols work." The officer scanned her ID, verified it through the system in 45 seconds, and smiled. "You're cleared, ma'am. Thank you for your service." It was simple, respectful, and exactly what should have happened 4 months ago. As Christine walked through the terminal toward her gate, she passed the security office where she'd been detained. It was now labeled Military Liaison Coordination Center, repurposed entirely. The room where Gary Mitchell had handcuffed her was now dedicated to ensuring no other service member faced similar treatment. She thought about Gary, working retail somewhere, his law enforcement career destroyed by 7 seconds of biased judgment. She felt no satisfaction in his downfall, but no sympathy either. Consequences, properly applied, were the only language that institutional bias understood. At the gate, A young black woman in Air Force lieutenant's uniform approached hesitantly. "Excuse me, ma'am. Are you Colonel Hayes?" Christine turned. "I am. I just wanted to say thank you. I'm Lieutenant Morgan, and I'm headed to my first assignment at Ramstein. When I heard what happened to you and saw how you handled it, it gave me confidence that I belong here, that we belong here." Christine felt the weight of those words. Lieutenant Morgan represented the future, the next generation of officers who might face fewer obstacles because someone had refused to accept unacceptable treatment. "You do belong here, Lieutenant," Christine said firmly. "And if anyone ever questions that, remember you have an entire institution behind you now. We've built safeguards. We've established protocols. We've made it clear that dignity isn't negotiable." As her flight boarded, Christine reflected on the journey from that security office to this moment. The investigations, the policy changes, the national conversation about bias and security, the 47 incidents prevented, the thousands of service members who would travel through airports with slightly more assurance that their credentials would be respected. The system wasn't perfect. 4 months couldn't undo decades of ingrained assumptions, but it was better. Measurably, documentably better. And sometimes justice wasn't about punishment or revenge. It was about transformation, taking the worst moment and forcing it to produce the best outcomes, taking humiliation and transforming it into accountability, taking individual bias and dismantling it with institutional change. As the aircraft taxied toward the runway, Christine looked out the window at the terminal she'd been detained in 4 months ago. From here, it looked small, manageable, conquered. If this story inspired you or reminded you that standing firm against injustice can transform entire systems, make sure you're subscribed. Share this with service members, veterans, or anyone who's ever been told they don't belong in a space they've earned the right to occupy. Because change doesn't happen through silence. It happens when one person refuses to accept being treated as less than they are, and when systems are forced to evolve or be dismantled. Colonel Christine Hayes didn't just survive discrimination, she weaponized it into reform. That's not just justice, that's legacy.